Let me start it. So, without further delays, I'm super happy that we have three friends here who are coming from different places, but now one traveling from Paris, second one from Romania, and a third one from Washington, D.C., but all of them are Americans. All of them are, I would say, nicely non-bipartisan, all three Republicans.
I'm not actually a Republican.
Hey, that was a President Trump handy from the debate. So anyway, I'm great that we have them here. In the next 4 weeks here at our Klubovna Clubhouse, we would like to do a lot about American elections. Now we have these three friends. In 3 weeks, we will have friends from Hudson Institute, Peter Raff, Joel Scanlon, Rebecca Hendricks, and others coming as well. So we will have a second American debate just before the election. I'm very happy that we have Kateřina Vajzová from Several who brought our friends here. And I will give her first opening time to introduce our guys. And then we, Katka and me, we will do just few opening questions. And then floor is yours, guys, like all the time.
Okay, so let me start with James Carafano. I have known James.
Who is not a Republican.
For a couple of years. He travels to Prague quite frequently. He's part of our flagship project here in the Czech Republic. He's senior advisor to president of Heritage Foundation. He's a lifelong expert on foreign policy issues. And actually what's interesting about him is that he served as a US military in 80s in Western Germany across our borders.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And actually, funny story, when I visited him in July in DC, so I came on the same day as he met our president, Petr Pavel, and he welcomed him at the Heritage Foundation. So I think it was a very interesting point. And
We're very happy that we
thank
never
you
shot
for
at each
doing
other.
that.
Yes.
This is Ambassador Adrian Zuckerman, who is, let's say, for quite a long time, close friend of Donald Trump. He was a US ambassador to Romania in the first Trump administration. And he is a real estate lawyer and partner of company, is it right?
I'm of counsel to a firm called DLA Piper in the US. And I'm glad you said of the first Trump administration.
He's the second one.
And we'll see what happens then.
And then we have here Glennie Howard, who used to be president of Jamestown Foundation for 20 years. He started his career in 80s at the US embassy in Moscow. He worked for a couple of years with Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he focuses his whole career on Russia and Eurasia. So you can ask him about Nord Stream, for example. You can ask him
I have a
about
Substack and a podcast, and recently talked about Nord Stream. So,
And I would say, you know, the great thing about Glenn is he's one of the few really serious, long-time researchers who's really focused on this. Other than maybe our friends at Hudson, there's probably nobody else in Washington, D.C. who tracks the issues in this part of it as deeply as Glenn does and has a better network of that. So
and this is my
great
first
person
trip
to
to Czechia.
Excellent.
So
So you can ask him about Russia, about Nord Stream, about all Eurasia area. And with Adrian, I think we can also talk about how to attract, if he gets elected, Donald Trump's attention to Central and Eastern Europe. Was the difference between Harris and Trump attitude towards these countries would be so.
And I would just add, just to be clear, none of us speak for the campaign or the candidate. You know, we actually, this group and a couple others have been to several different places, and we just come in, kind of share and dialogue, but we're not officially speaking for anybody other than us.
And I think that my first question won't be a question. It will be I would like to ask you for a sort of opening monologue, because data shows, data from this country, that if elections would be here in Czech Republic, of course we are not voting in American elections, a very large majority would vote for Kamala Harris. And actually people here in the region, Czech Republic included, you know, they are worried about how the second Trump administration will look like. You know, a lot is being written and said about his approach towards Ukraine, I want to finish it immediately, so people are scared about it. It's about isolationism. It's about America first, nobody else. So, whether it's information, misinformation, but basically my opening spiel for you is just in few sentences, tell us how you think, if Trump elected, how it will look like. And shall people here in the region shall be worried?
Yeah. Well, I think let me start with Adrian because he can actually speak about knowing him personally and also being inside in the first Trump administration. So why don't you give us that?
Jim, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let me just say this first. Thank you very much for helping us be here tonight. Jan, it's great to see you again, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and all your friends. Let me give you the short answer first, and then I'll expand on it a little bit. What most people should be worried about is if Trump is not elected. There couldn't be a worse disaster for Europe, Eastern Europe, if the Biden-Harris policies of the last 4 years continue. I think during the first Trump administration, the policies towards Europe, towards Romania, and I know the Romanian ambassador, my friend, is here tonight, the Romanian ambassador to the Czech Republic is here tonight. All the arms deal, except the recent F-35 deal, were done during the Trump administration. The Patriots, the HIMARS, the coastal strike missiles, all the other stuff was done during the Trump administration 4 years ago. Troops were supposed to move, additional troops, about 5,000. I'm not telling you anything that's not public. Stryker Brigade was supposed to be moved into Romania. Troops were supposed to be redeployed from Germany and Poland to Czechia, if I recall correctly, but definitely into Romania. All those plans were restructured and abandoned by the Biden administration. The Black Sea area, the importance of the Black Sea to the region was a priority for the Trump administration. Free trade, open markets, responsibility in terms of defense, the advancement of democracy, and a focus on Eastern Europe and developing Eastern Europe was one of the priorities of the Trump administration. The lack of planning for the war in Ukraine, which has caused tremendous division in Europe, in NATO, and around the world, would not happen. And I think Trump would resolve the war in one day by doing the following. And again, I don't speak for President Trump, but my sense is he will make a phone call to Putin and say, the game's over, you gotta go home, have a nice life at home. But what if I don't go? You don't want to find out what happens if you don't go. It's going to take some time to implement whatever resolution's going to happen with that. But I think that's going to be the gist of the conversation on the first or second day after Trump is elected. The problem right now with Ukraine war, there's been no plan. If you ask anybody in the administration, from the Pentagon to the State Department to the National Security Council, there is absolutely no plan. There is no end game, which I find to be an amazing sort of situation where you just give somebody a check. Well, how are you going to use the money? What are you going to do with it? Why are you going to? There's no plan. Nobody knows what the plan is. And now that the Ukrainians made their push into Russia, they're still not letting them use the long-range U.S. rockets or English or French, and which I find amazing. The other consequence, and I'll finish in a second, I don't want to monopolize this, but as a consequence of this ongoing war in Ukraine, there are divisions in NATO, there are divisions in the EU. The war has created unanticipated and closer alliances between Russia, China, and Iran, the axis of evil. BRICS has gotten more important, so South Africa, Brazil, North Korea, Venezuela. It led to the direct commencement of the war in the Middle East, where Iran got Hamas and Hezbollah to attack Israel to distract attention from the issues in Ukraine. There are 6 or 8 civil wars now going on in Africa. and there's military tension in South America, and all the countries in Central America, with the exception of El Salvador, have a socialist or communist government because of State Department aided human rights and other rights campaigns, which led to socialist communist type governments there. So to me, I compare the Biden-Harris administration to a arsonist because the world's basically on fire right now. So
And just to be clear, so not abandoning Ukraine and not leaving NATO, is that?
exactly
Would you put money
so.
on that index? Okay.
The Trump administration always supported NATO, but they wanted to pay. I'm glad you raised NATO specifically. The Trump administration wanted NATO countries to pay their fair share. And not this year, but all the years before, since the Wales Pledge, which calls for each NATO member to pay 2% of GDP for its own defense. It's not a payment to the US, it's not a payment to anybody else. It's just a payment for spending. It's a threshold spending level in its own defense capabilities. Only 9 of 28 countries, now there are 32, but only 9 countries paid 9%. Germany, Holland, France, they didn't even come close. Holland was at barely over 1%. Germany was similar. Spain still is at 1%. Latvia, Estonia, the Baltics always paid. Romania paid. The Czechs paid. So we have a situation where Trump said, look, you're piggybacking on U.S. expenditures. We're keeping, I think the numbers, over 100,000 service people, Germany, all through Europe. In some respects, it could be more with the rotational troops, depending what time of year, to defend you. It's not fair. So it's like being in a business partnership where each partner has to pay $5 a month to run the business. And you have some partners say, hey, I'm not going to pay because you're not going to let the business go bust. What do you do with them? I don't know. It's a problem. But that's what Trump wanted to do. And Trump was proven right because now the NATO countries do not have enough munitions. They don't have, their armies are ill prepared. Everything that he feared has been proven true. What was your second issue? I forgot.
No, that's good. Let me give a different answer to the same question because but first, by the way, Glenn does not have COVID. Now, as good American conservatives, if he did, we wouldn't care. But I just wanted you to know that. So we always make this thing it's all about Trump, and certainly I think when you talk to different segments of the European, and they kind of picture this as is about this Trump versus Harris thing. But so let me paint the picture that it's not really all about Trump. When you think about how conservatives are coming in at American foreign policy, so there's been a dramatic shift in our politics over the last several decades. I mean, really, from the end of World War II through the 1990s, our political parties were both very geographically and ideologically diverse. So, for example, when Ronald Reagan won as a conservative president, a lot of the conservative voters that voted for him were Democrats. Right? So what's really started in the 1990s, for a whole bunch of reasons that political scientists go into, we really began this transformation where our parties have become, not perfectly, but more ideologically and geographically less diverse. And so I don't think it's an enormous stretch to say. And the other thing is unlike most European, we are trapped into political parties, right? If you can't, maybe Liz Cheney is upset, but she just can't go out. Well, she could go out and start her own political party, but it would have like 5 voters in it, right? So we're just trapped in these two political parties, which means you kind of have to pick a side. And so now what's happened is, for all intents and purposes, the Republican Party is a conservative party. The Democratic Party is a progressive party. That's just the reality. And I think, so that is, Donald Trump did not create the modern Republican Party. He may have been the first national leader that really observed where the movement was going and figured out how to capitalize on that. But everybody is not a conservative or a MAGA today because Donald Trump told them they were. This is where they all wind up together. Now, what's interesting on that particular foreign policy is, our conservative foreign policy is often portrayed as this kind of Manichaean debate between isolationists, and kind of internationalists and maybe neocons over in the corner. And that's simply not true. There is no kind of eternal struggle in the conservative party. No, there's an isolationist wing in the Republican Party. It's only been there since like forever. I actually don't think it's any bigger than it's ever been. It might be more vocal. It tends to be more vocal when there are wars and big foreign policy issues. But I think that segment of the party is actually stagnant. We have an internationalist wing of the party. It's probably the fastest shrinking wing of the party of something where you couldn't tell the difference between back when when McCain and Obama ran for president the first time, for fun, I used to take their quotes and I used to ask people who said what. And like half the time people would get it wrong, right? So that kind of internationalist wing of the Republican Party is certainly in favor. And neocons, I think, are pretty much kind of completely out of favor. So what you have in the conservative, I don't want to say pirates because you guys have pirates, so you know what that's like. But it is a large, diverse group of people who find themselves all in one party. And unlike we're under Reagan, where they all just voted for the same guy and they were happy, now they actually kind of have to work together. And so what we're seeing on foreign policy is this dynamic. And again, it's not something Trump created, but it's something he certainly kind of identified, which is the debate is over what's in America's interest. And so what we actually have is a very, very healthy debate among conservatives about what is the best foreign and national security policy that serves the interests of the United States. So I convene a national security working group. I have all the children, the lost children there. So I've got the most right-wing isolationist people you can imagine. I've got people that used to work for George Bush or Dick Cheney, and I put them all in the room together. And the interesting thing is when they discuss issues, and we actually get down to talking nuts and bolts issues, they wind up agreeing about 85% of the time, because I always spin the basis, okay, how does this serve the national interest? So I think that is what to expect from American foreign policy. And so if you take that template and you overplay it on NATO and Europe, what do you see? And the reality is Europe and NATO are central to transatlantic security. So Americans have a vested interest in Europe being whole, free, prosperous, safe, and secure. Now, even among Republicans and conservatives, we debate what that means, but the core of the movement doesn't question the actual premise of that. And if there's one thing that I've seen in Donald Trump consistently, and Adrian's no way longer than I have it, so he can confirm or deny this, but it's that in the end of the day, the president will always opt for the option which he is convinced best serves the country's interests. I'll give you a super quick example, and then we can jump on. And I think this is actually the best example, which is Afghanistan. President Trump walked in the door on day one, absolutely convinced that Afghanistan was a huge mistake, and he wanted to get out. And he said that from the very first. And he sat down with his team, and they, I don't want to say talked him out of it, but they basically said, look, here's all the pros and cons of doing this. And when you look at that, the cons are pretty consequential. And I can't tell you how many times, I have friends in the National Security Council, I can't tell you how many times they called me in the first 6 months saying, yes, we have a decision from President Trump. We're announcing a policy tomorrow. And then nothing happened, right? Because they were debating this thing out, and they debated it out for several months. And eventually what happened was they convinced Trump that just preemptively leaving Afghanistan was a bad idea. But on the other hand, Trump said, okay, but what we're doing is stupid. And, and he insisted on some changes in policy. And, Trump spent less in a year in Afghanistan than what at the height of the Obama years we spent in a week. And I forget the exact number, but in the last X number of months that we were in Afghanistan, there were literally no American casualties and almost nobody in combat. So Trump said, okay, I buy that, we have to stay and we have to try to find a path to a stable Afghanistan before we exit. It's not going to be based on a calendar. It's not going to be based on a timeline. It's going to be based on effects base. I get that. I'm for that. But we're going to do things that I think better serve the America's interest. And I think that's a reflection of the decision maker we really have, as opposed to, I think, many of the perceptions that people have here that just presumptively we're going to leave. And I will just end on this because the best example of this is the so-called pivot to Asia, where apparently we're having this Manichaean debate about, well, we're just going to walk away from Europe and we're going to walk away from the Middle East and we're going to go, occupy Chinese restaurants in Taiwan. Look, first of all, every president since George Bush has tried this strategy. And at the end of their presidencies, they always wind up back in the Middle East and Europe for a reason. The other thing is I think there's no real intellectual depth to this notion of a pivot, right? So what are we pivoting? 70% of the US Navy is based in Asia. If we move the other 30% there, we'd have nothing, right? So there would be no American ships in the Red Sea right now trying to maintain freedom of navigation or deterring Iran, period. So we can't pivot the Navy. 90% of the US Army is permanently stationed in the United States because our Army's quite honestly not big enough to seriously pre-possession in large numbers in any theater. That ain't gonna change. Our Air Force is all over the world, which is actually, we have an Air Force that deploys globally, so it actually doesn't matter where our Air Force is. It's actually to our advantage to have it in a lot of different places because we get places. And shockingly, our Space Force is in space, so they can't really pivot. So from a purely military perspective, there is no pivot, right? And so it's really not about abandoning Europe and the Middle Eastern theaters. And I think we'll see this from the Trump administration. It's about, if we're going to build up capacity in the Asia Pacific, we have to stabilize these other theaters. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to do that. So there's a lot of debate. We can have a discussion. We can talk about what we're going to do in the Middle East. Clearly, the strategy in NATO is cooked, which is the U.S. is going to stay. We're going to continue to press for allies to do their contributions. And what we're going to wind up with, I think, is a very defensible NATO frontier. I think Ukraine and NATO are not the top tier issues for Trump when he walks in the door. It's actually going to be Latin America, immigration, border security, and the Middle East, not Europe.
Let me add two
Adrian.
things, quick things, because I think, forgive me, but Jim's 100% right.
Wait, I'm going to text
Yeah,
that.
don't write that.
Let me just tape it. Can
I withdraw that. He may be right. A lot of people, especially left-wing media, when Trump says America first, they interpret that as America first and to hell with everybody else. And that's not what he's talking about. And I've seen it in Romania when I was ambassador. I've seen it in another country from all of my colleagues in different countries. What he is saying is, figure out what you need to do for yourselves and we will help you. We're not going to say, we will figure out what you should be doing. Each country should be figuring out for themselves where they want to be, how they want to be there, and we will help you. Because I, Donald Trump, or I, the United States, cannot figure out where the Czech Republic should be, or where Romania should be, or where France should be. You guys figure it out. We will be there with you. But his message was very ably distorted by a lot of populist or left-wing media and say, America first, forget everybody else. And that's absolutely untrue. And I've seen the policy, and all my colleague ambassadors I've seen the same policy. And I'm telling you that because I know. Number two, with Afghanistan and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was such a debacle, Trump had his plan, and I just want to add that because a lot of people don't know this. There were three different things than what Biden did, because as opposed to Biden, Trump and his people really thought this thing through. One, he would have left 1,000, 2,000 people there. Number two, he would have left strategic and intelligence support and air power if it was needed, if there was a problem. And third, and the most important thing is, all the issues after and during the withdrawal were caused by the Taliban. The Taliban were in a little area, enclave in the north of the country. Trump would have had the following discussion. If you guys take one step south of your little area now, we're going to kill you. We're going to bomb you to kingdom come, and it's over. Biden did not have that discussion with the Taliban. Biden says, we're leaving tomorrow. Good luck. And we all saw the horrible, horrible results. So that's all I have to
Let's
say.
give Glenn a really hard question. Go ahead.
So, guys, you already killed a lot of my questions because you answered them proactively. So, when I was thinking about this debate, it was on Friday. I was flying from New York City here. So I was at JFK Airport, so I saw a lot of lovely cups. So I bought a lot of them. So we have a lot of cups. You need to send it to your friends.
As a nonpartisan guy, I'm not touching the cups.
And to have a real debate, I also thought that I need at least to buy one Kamala's one. But nobody would believe that I am Democrat. So for purpose of this debate,
That one has a pearl in it, by the way.
yeah.
Just kidding.
So for purpose of this debate,
I don't think it was a pearl.
for the purpose of this debate, I am playing Liz Cheney. So Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican daughter of Vice President Dick Cheney, who doesn't vote for Donald Trump. And I was watching her on the telly when I was in New York last week. She got a big interview, and one of the argument why she's going to vote for Kamala was this, and that's my question for you guys. First, Glenn. You know, if you are president of the United States, with the blessing of a Senate, you need to fill 3,000 jobs. Ambassadors being one of them, but also secretaries and of course the Supreme Court, etc. And we saw during first Trump administration how chaotic it was. You know, people were like changing like marionettes. So many national security advisors every time they change. And it didn't help us stability of the United States of America nor our allies that it was so bloody chaotic. And I think that Trump #2 will be much worse because he has nothing to lose. It's his last term. So it might happen that, you know, some Fox News bunny will end as a Secretary of State. I am quoting Liz Cheney on the telly last week.
Okay.
Go.
Wes is the most non-political guy in the room.
I know. Well, I would say that when you look at a Kamala Harris administration, you're going to see more Obama 2.0 than you will see Biden. Many of the advisors and people advising Kamala Harris on foreign policy consist of groups that have kind of come from the Obama areas. And so there will be this mixture. So when you say Obama 2.0, that will resonate with a certain way of style and approach, which if you remember what Obama did for Ukraine, he sent his military assistance to Ukraine was to send them non-lethal assistance. So that was to send them things like body armor and things like that. So there will be a continuation of being kind of risk averse. And what I wanted to say to what Jim and Adrian were saying is that Trump's policies will be primarily domestic beginning early in the administration, but those domestic policies have repercussions for foreign policy, which are if he opens up American drilling and starts to drill for oil again and opens up the leases, this has repercussions for the price of oil in Europe and price of oil around as the U.S. around the world as the United States continues to turn on the floodgate of exports again. And so this will also affect LNG exports, U.S. LNG exports to Europe, which Biden has stopped, by the way, because of environmental concerns, to Germany. So this has a geopolitical impact on Russia because one of the reasons Russia left the war in Afghanistan in 1980s was the drop in the price of oil. It made it very difficult for the Russians to keep funding the war. So I would see a similar outcome like that. It's probably not what Trump is envisioning or what he intended, but it's just going to be an aspect of his policies that will carry on in terms of foreign relations. And I would say that Trump has probably more than any other president visited more places in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union than any American president. I mean, he's invested in Trump Towers in Baku, Azerbaijan. He's invested in Kazakhstan. So he was good friends with the president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, who's now in jail. So he knew all these people all over the world, and obviously his first wife was Czech. So there's a certain aspect that he understands. Now, why did Trump support the 3 Cs initiative? Because he's looking at Europe in terms of trade blocks. And he looks at 3 Cs initiative as a way to counter the European Union. And he put millions, was it 300 million, Jim? Is that the right number?
Well, it said up to $1 billion.
Up to $1 billion to invest in the 3 Cs initiative. And this is the idea behind 3 Cs initiative is to develop counter trade within the West European context. So it's more to open up the aspects of trade and transportation in Eastern Europe. And that's why his policies and instincts are more for what they used to call the new Europe. And I think that has a certain aspect to it that rings well for this part of the world, because his concern is to try as much as possible to make the United States less German-centric and trying to make it and think in terms of countering the European Union, in my opinion. And this is why he's looking at other types of trade blocks, trade opportunities, trade flows to help counter the existing trade flows that go directly between Western Europe and the United States and the rest of the world. So he does think in terms of these ways. He thinks in terms of countering China. And so this is going to open the door to certain instincts that he has. Trump's problems in the first administration, in my opinion, were that he had people, senior advisors, senior officials in the government, as Jim said, that weren't really kind of carrying out his own policies. They kind of had their own views on things they wanted to do. And so you had someone like Jim Mattis, who's former Secretary of Defense, that was completely against Trump's idea of leaving northern Syria. I mean, he completely was, and he resigned because of that. It was a very well-known incident. But Trump's instincts were to get out of that particular strategic environment. And so And he was also very much against Nord Stream all along. So, in putting sanctions against Germany for importing Russian gas. So, and this is something people quickly forgot about because of the way the media talks about certain discussions. And they always frames the debate so that everything that you're listening, hearing about Trump here in terms of U.S. politics is what is being cast in the way the information is being shaped inside the United States among the major news media conglomerates that are openly pro-Biden, so and pro-Kamala Harris. So, and it kind of overlooks these certain instincts that Trump has. I'm not saying that he's a geopolitician. I'm not saying that he is a Brzezinski or someone that has a certain Nixonian aspect of what he does, but he also has this cold-hearted view of the world, and a view in American power, and that view in American power is that if you don't play by our rules, you better watch out, because we're not. We'll be honest and straightforward with you, as Trump was about when he ordered the attacks on the Wagner forces in Syria. He killed over 300 Russians in one airstrike. There were more Russians killed in one airstrike in Syria by President Trump than any American president's killed since the end of the Cold War. And so this was a red line for Trump. And when he sets red lines, he means it. And he also believes that you don't send your signals, tell your enemy what you won't do. And so we have forgotten about that in the United States today. And that's a key element of deterrence. Yep. Deterrence is all about red lines and your willingness to enforce those red lines. But today, with the current administration, it's all about escalation. We don't want World War III. Oh my God, we can't have this. And it's just, we become hostage of our own fears in our own policy.
So let's kind of get back to the manning of the administration, and I'll let the ambassador talk about all the sexy stuff about who's going to have what jobs and all that stuff. Because two things. Glenn's point about what is a Harris foreign policy, what does a Harris team look like, which I think is also an important question. And it is easy to say, well, it's going to be the same because it's all the same people. Obama, Biden, Harris, the core of the foreign policy people are literally all the same. So you would expect a continuation of existing policies. And there is a lot of continuity from Obama to Biden to Harris. But the one thing I think that is different about Harris is that there are elements of the Obama, Biden, Harris foreign policy that I think are just simply unsustainable. And so, for example, Middle East policy. I don't see how you can continue down the road with the current Middle East policy on Iran and Israel and how that's sustainable over time. Energy policy. Energy and environmental policy. I think we're coming to a moment when we're recognizing that, the ambitious goals of green transition and net zero are not only maybe unrealistic, but they're actually competing with issues of growth and economic stability, and that has to be addressed. I don't think she's going to walk into the G7 and G20 and find leaders who just sing Kumbaya on every progressive idea. So I think there are lots of areas where she's going to find that the orthodoxy of progressive foreign policy isn't going to work anymore, and she's going to have to figure out, border immigration, I think, is another issue, and she's going to figure out, what do I do now? And that I think will be greatly challenging, because I don't think that's something they've actually wrapped their heads around. On the Trump side, this is not the worst mistake you could possibly make, to think is that this is the Trump of 2016 or the administration of 2016. First of all, Trump is not a stupid man. He learned from 4 years in office. He's been watching 4 years in office. One of the lessons that they learned is people are policy. They have a very robust group to pull from that they didn't have in 2016. So I'm actually very confident that there are a lot of very competent people that we know that are available to work in government, that are willing to work in government. I don't think they're going to have a problem doing that. I think they're poised to actually front load a lot of appointments. And the other thing I say, it makes a huge difference in America if you're out of power 4 years or 8 years. If you're out of power 4 years, you just come back in and you start throwing switches and go in the opposite direction. If you're out of power 8 years, you can't even find the bathrooms anymore. I mean, it just changes so dramatically. So the fact that, here's an opportunity for Republicans, unlike the Obama years, to only have been out of power 4 years and know what they want to do, I think you'll find a very, very, very different team. But as to what it looks like, because the one thing I'm always interested in is we always see from Trump this notion of, I want people that get stuff done and don't bother me and are very effective, but I love bright, shiny objects. And how that plays out is always interesting. So how will that play out?
Great.
Oh, I don't know about the bright shiny object, but I think President
Not that
Trump,
you were a bright shiny object. You actually, you delivered. Yeah.
but he's very pragmatic, business oriented, and I'll tell you this because I do know him. He is a true believer in fairness and decency. So when you see a lot of trade deal negotiations, when you see a lot of other negotiations, he has this overwhelming sense of fairness. And I think that's why a lot of the European countries who have not paid their 2% Wales pledge are so irritating to him because he perceives it like a business deal. We each promised to pay $10. You're only paying $5. Where's the money? You promised to pay it. It's not fair. It's not right. So I think you see that in him all the time. And personally, I think the man is right. I think he's been proving right by what's happening in Europe, by what's happened globally. I can't overemphasize what Jim said with regard to a number of people in the first administration that seemed like the right people for the right job, not really sharing Trump's vision because he came from the private sector. He's not a politician. That's what gave him insights that other people did not have. That's what gave him the power that other people did not have because he was not looking to make a career out of politics. He came in to fix things that he perceived were broken in America after 8 years of Obama. And a lot, not being a career politician, he didn't have a team around him of people that he could say, okay, you're here, you're there, you're in the other place. And he relied on others from different other factions of the Republican Party to fill positions. And those people, to some degree, shared his vision. To some degree, they did not share his vision. And it created issues in carrying out and implementing his vision. He also kept a lot of people in place, not realizing he's in government and not in business, who would say, yes, Mr. President, we got your back. We're doing what we're doing. And they were doing exactly something different. Jim Comey being a perfect example of that. He should have been put out the first day President Trump took office. So who is going to come in this year? I don't know, but I think Jim is right. He's going to have an experienced group of people coming in, I would say on day one, day two at the latest, to take over and implement his policies. And again, I think Europe in particular, but a lot of other countries around the world should pray every day that President Trump wins, because a lot of the issues facing the world today, in my opinion, will be resolved in fairly quick order. All the conflicts will be resolved in fairly quick order. The energy issues will be resolved with America taking its preeminent spot again. Global inflation will be resolved. So to me, it would be a good thing. And the thing I fear the most is growing Chinese influence. And everybody says, look at Taiwan because they threaten Taiwan. I don't believe that's the game. I think that's the magician waving his hand up here while he's picking your pocket with his other hand. I think the Philippines, the Chinese now are taking over a number of disputed islands in the Philippines to which they really have no bona fide claim. And I think that's where the real game is. I don't think there's a realistic or actual plan to take over Taiwan. I could be wrong, but I just think they're solidifying their position in the Philippines and other places.
So now I will be having a question, just a comment, and I would like then to give a floor to Katka to ask for a question as our co-host. And then please feel free to ask anything, and I hope that we will have a lot of good questions. But my comment is this, and basically I will be a little bit rephrasing what Jim was starting with, that, you know, the movement moved somewhere else, and Trump is not influencing the movement, but Trump is a product of it. So before New York City, me and Ambassador Munter, we went to Washington before New York, and we met with guys from Democratic Party and Republicans. And our feeling was that we Czechs and you guys Americans, that we have sort of like distorted picture of ourselves. You guys, especially on the Democratic side, you believe that this country is being still run by Václav Havel, that we are back in the 90s. And actually, we have a similar view. We believe that Washington, D.C. is being run by Madeleine Albright and Bill Clinton.
She is dead, right?
Yeah, but this is the Václav Havel also. But this is the feeling. But what the data shows, and I put a lot of data I was given by Republican pollsters, I put them on my Twitter and Substack today. So 66% of American electorate, 66 means that not only Republicans, but also Democrats, they want swift conclusion of Ukraine war by negotiation. This is the feeling of United States of America now, the data from 2 weeks ago. Second thing, this is very important. The large majority, both Republicans and Democrats of American people, they believe that Washington, and let's call them deep state, President Trump words, they are not fulfilling interest of American people when projecting America abroad, so doing American foreign policy. It's a huge number. Third thing, which is also interesting, we feel that the isolationist is Trump. But when we look into data, both Republican and Democratic Party, isolationism is not the key element. In both parties, it's sort of MAGA, whether we like the word or not. This is what American people want, America first. And then isolationist element is very similar in both parties. 35% of Republican voters are isolationists, 32 Democrats. So it's not that different. So basically sometimes we are thinking something about America, which America is not. And then we have a democracy. And what we heard from Democrats was not that different what you guys said about President Trump, about Ukraine. So very people inside Democratic Party, they told us, don't believe that Kamala Harris administration will be playing what Europe wants. This is not possible because American people don't want it. So look at the data, they are extremely interesting, and especially the first number I said, 66% of American voters want to have it done quickly.
I'll spend with you guys the whole day tomorrow. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, I think it might be a better opportunity for you.
Romania ambassador.
Thank you, Jan, for this really very interesting debate, and it helps us going beyond labels, because there is a lot of simplification in general debates in Europe about NATO policies. So thank you for this, and I think it's you, Jim, that said that Europe and the NATO are essential also for America's security, and I would say the vice versa is also valid, even more so for our region and for my country. So it's crucial to have this transatlantic partnership. Now to my question about something you, Adrian, mentioned about Trump solving the war in Ukraine in 1 day or 2 days, but as you said. So I think, and Julian rightly mentioned, public opinion is expecting this war to end, not only in America, but also in Europe. There is a clear war fatigue after 3 years of war. There are divisions in Europe, there are divisions in societies that influence elections. So it's clearly something it's a desirable goal. But what is also important, especially in this part of Europe, is what kind of peace. Everybody wants peace.
Right.
But what kind of peace are we talking about? And how should this war end? Should this war end with Ukraine giving up some of its territory? In my country, this gives us a shiver, because we lived that in our history. So what kind of peace and how should we reach this? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's always important when you're looking at attitudes of countries, particularly in areas of national security and foreign policy, to distinguish popularity from popular will. Popularity is, what do I want? Popular will is, what am I willing to actually support? Those can be two very, very different things. So, for example, we want a negotiated peace. Well, in 1944, they did a survey of Americans, and they asked Americans, if you wanted to have a negotiated peace with Germany and Japan, are you okay with that? And the majority of Americans said, yeah. They said, fine, have a negotiation. Are you willing to fight till unconditional surrender? And Americans said, yeah, right? So it's not unusual for people to say, yeah, I'd like this war to end. That's just a human impulse, right? And it's the same way in Ukraine. If you went to Ukraine today and you surveyed Ukrainians, they go, do you want the war to end? They go, yeah. So look, I will go off something that J.D. Vance said, which is maybe kind of portrayed as most kind of radical explanation of the American position. But actually, if you actually unpack it and parse it, it actually is pretty innocuous, right? So first of all, he said, look, we're not going to underwrite Ukraine fighting to get back every last inch of Ukrainian territory. Okay, that's just the reality. Let's be honest, for example, from a NATO perspective, Crimea, it's important to the Ukrainians. They'd love to have the Sea of Azov, but from a NATO perspective, Crimea is not the be-all and end-all of NATO security. Don't forget, for the entire Cold War, all of Ukraine was in the Warsaw Pact, and we got by just fine. The Seventh Fleet, I mean, the U.S. Sixth Fleet can kill everything in the Black Sea from the Mediterranean. We don't have to be in the Black Sea, right? I think it's unrealistic for either a Republican or a Democratic administration, as you said, to underwrite an endless war of Ukrainians to fight forever. Now, do conservatives want a free and independent Ukraine? Absolutely. Because, and here's the thing, name me a scenario where America is better off if Russia is controlling Ukraine. And the answer is you can't. And Trump's a lot of things, but he's not stupid. Trump had one good day with Putin. He went to Helsinki and he said hi. And Putin made him look like a freaking idiot. And Trump walked away from that meeting and he might say, oh yeah, Putin, whatever, but he never ever again trusted Putin and he never gave him the time of day. And he's not going to in the future. So the last thing he's going to do is come in and hand Putin something at the negotiating table that Putin couldn't win on the battlefield. Having said that, is the U.S. ever going to, or would the U.S. ever advocate for you have to give up the sovereignty of occupied territory? And the answer is probably not. We didn't do it in Germany in 1945. We never did it in Israel. We never did it in South Korea. So I think the distinction there is the line that they'll come in and they'll say, look, the line is where the line is. How we deal with the territorial curse? I don't know. That's a new wrinkle. That'd be interesting. The other one, he says, well, they're not getting in NATO or the EU. Well, that's frankly just honestly a statement of reality. There is no consensus today for Ukraine to join NATO or the EU. Honestly, that's unlikely to change in the next 5 years on either case. It's just the reality. I think from a NATO security standpoint, it's also kind of irrelevant. If there is a massive Ukrainian army, that is a factor for the Russians that they have to live with. And you now have 1,000, if you actually look, the NATO frontier is more defensible today than it was when I was on the NATO frontier in the 1980s. There's more strategic depth. The correlation of forces is better. You've got 1,000 miles of front that the Russians didn't have back then. You've got a massive Ukrainian army sitting in the middle. What are the Russians going to do? Wave to the Ukrainian armies? They attack somebody else? You can't do that. You're going to have a Polish military that's committed to a modernization on both a liberal and conservative government, so that's going to happen. And then you're going to be anchored in a Romanian military that's actually quite capable. And so you've got a very, very defensible front. So I just think that's all Vance was really stating is, look, this is the reality of where conditions are. And I think that the key issue is what Adrian said, which is, if you look at the first term, Trump offered deals to the Chinese, to the Russians, to the Iranians, to the North Koreans, everybody except the cartels in Mexico, right? And they were all the same. It's like, look, you want to stop, I want to stop, great. You want something, I want something, great. Okay, here's the deal. But then if they say, oh, we don't like that deal, Trump doesn't say, oh my God, what else can I throw in here? Do you want a toaster or a blender, right? Trump doesn't give you more, right? And so the notion, yeah, right. So the notion that Trump's going to put a deal on the table and Putin says no, then the Trump response, well, here are the consequences of not taking this deal. If that's the road you want to go down, fine. And here's the big difference. This is a lot like, was it 53? Eisenhower, right? Election? 50 or 52? 52, right. 52. Right. This is like Eisenhower 52 or Nixon 73, right? Which is, in both cases, if you actually look at the candidates, their real campaign thing is I'll do better than the other guy, right? I mean, Eisenhower didn't really have much to offer. He says, don't worry, I'll handle this. Nixon said, I have a secret plan to end the war, which of course he didn't have any plan, but it's, I'll take care of it, right? All Trump is really saying is, don't worry, Americans, I'll take care of it. If he wins, the people that vote to put him in are going to have confidence in him to do the right thing. They're not necessarily going to demand that he do something on day one, and if he doesn't do it, they're going to, not back him. They're going to support him. So he's going to have a pretty amount of goodwill, at least for a year or two. And unless things go catastrophically wrong, American conservatives will let him run the foreign policy that he wants. And all the indications we have right now is that foreign policy includes stopping the war. And maybe you need to actually talk about this. Is one of the core reasons that he wants to stop the war is not so much geopolitics. It's also his abhorrence of needless human suffering. He doesn't like to see innocent people die. So maybe you can talk, because you got examples of that from the first administration.
I do, but let me just add one thing, because I happen, sadly so, to agree with most of what you said. I think when we look at the war in Ukraine, there's 2 or 3 ways to look at it. First, it's the war in itself, the Russian invasion, now a minor Ukrainian invasion into Russian territory. But then you have a bigger issue. You have the global implications of that. And again, all the things that are going on in Africa, direct consequence of this war. The things that are going on in the Middle East, direct consequence of this war. The alliances, the newly formed alliances between Russia, Iran, and China, which are the most significant, but there are others in smaller countries, a direct consequence of this war. So when you look at resolving this, one thing is the war itself in Ukraine. The other is the bigger global policy issues. Do you give Putin something he wants? Is that an encouragement for him to maybe go into Moldova after that, or try another incursion into one of the Baltics, or try some other thing in Africa, for example, where they have a substantial presence, as do the Chinese? I don't know, but those are the issues that have to be dealt with. The Ukrainians, in my opinion, have kind of become like a pawn in a global struggle between superpowers here. Yes, they're a significant pawn that trigger other consequences, but it's not the war in and of itself that's the big problem. The big problem are all of the other geopolitical consequences. Jim spoke about Crimea. Yes, we lived with Crimea being Russian for any number of years, but now Crimea is like an aircraft carrier for the Russians in the Black Sea. The Black Sea is a strategic, a crucial commercial body of water which needs to be freely navigated. Before the war, the Russians played around. They closed off great swaths of it for alleged military exercises, which were not really so. It was intended to disrupt traffic between the countries bordering the eastern side of the Black Sea and the western side. So yes, Crimea in and of itself, the U.S. can live with it or without it. But you also need to look at the strategic importance of Crimea, not to the specific war, but to the ability of the Russians to exert influence and do other things. So the actual framework of a resolution, in my opinion, after that first initial wake-up call to Putin telling him the game's over, I don't know the framework, but the game's going to be over on that first day, and he's going to know it. It's not going to be structured and implemented for a period of time, but in its essence, it'll be over that first day, because Putin's going to know he can't mess with us.
Do you have any insights on the Zelensky-Trump conversation that you can share?
No. But I do know the last issue you raised, President Trump cares an awful lot about human life. And there were incidents in the past, particularly with Iran knocking down some of our drones, where he could have easily hit a variety of sites in Iran, most likely killing innocent office worker, cleaning people. And he refrained from doing that because he wanted to avoid doing exactly that. It wasn't because he was weak. or equivocal like Biden, Harris, and the minstrels that surround them, the leftovers from the Obama administration. He had no hesitation hitting Soleimani, hitting some other people, because they're bad guys, evil guys, caused murder and brutality around the world. So he had no qualm about doing that, but he will absolutely go out of his way to protect and avoid the death of innocent civilians, women, children. And a lot of people don't give him credit for that. Again, it's this left-wing Democratic spin that does him a great disfavor, and it's absolutely not true. I can tell you that firsthand.
Yeah, it was what the ambassador was saying about what is the peace plan. You know, the NSC Europe director, Michael Carpenter, asked Zelensky, he gave an interview with Voice of America before Zelensky came to the U.S., and he said, "We don't know what your plan is. We've never seen Zelensky's plan. We hope that he can share it when he comes, because when we've asked about it, we don't know what it is." So there's a great degree of uncertainty of what is going on with the peace plan. But the way I would envision it is that the best scenario possible is an armistice, a frozen conflict that would make the Dnipro River in eastern Ukraine into a new demilitarized zone like North Korea and South Korea. It would leave the Russians in force in place in Crimea, but it's an armistice that can resume with hot fighting at any time. And so what the outlook would be is that not a withdrawal or nothing movement in terms of concrete agreements on anything. It's just going to be leave it in place, position forces in place, and then Ukraine will be on the edge of Europe as a new sort of Korean DMZ that is pulling in the same way that Japan is pulled in to Korea in the crisis, that in the ongoing situation in the Korean Peninsula is the same way is going to be pulling in Romania, pulling in East European neighbors. It will be a conflict that's frozen, but with intermittent hostilities continuously emerging. And it makes it even harder because it's the Black Sea. And the Black Sea will be a zone of shooting infractions until they decide to do something militarily to help Ukraine, similar to the Crimea offensive that destroyed the Serbs when you follow the Yugoslav war, when you retook territory. And that's what Ukraine's been trying to do, is retake territory to give itself a better bargaining position in negotiations with Russia. And so this, in fact, they're now saying that the Ukrainian forces will be permanently in the Kursk region for the rest of the year. So this is, and this is a huge front that goes all the way from Kursk down to the Black Sea. So we can hope that it's solved. And I think President Trump, when he comes in, will say, let's try to get something done. And he'll leave his diplomats to try to resolve the specifics of what is done. But I don't see that happening, because any armistice, the way that Putin views Ukraine, is going to lead to rearmament. And so this is just, it's just like people thought, you know, when in the discussion of European history, they called the wars of World War I and World War II were called continuation wars. That they thought that the war to end all wars would just end. And it didn't, because Germany rearmed, and there was certain, the movement of European history was one of conflict until it was finally resolved with the destruction of Germany.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, you know, people say frozen conflict is inconceivable and unacceptable. Well, that's what happened in Germany in 1945. That's what happened in Korea in 1953. That's what happened in Israel. And, you know, you can say, well, even if Ukraine reconquered every inch of Ukrainian territory, that doesn't mean it's not a continuation conflict. Doesn't mean the Russians have to. So what I think people miss is they look at that conflict and that frozen, which eventually came to fairly decent outcomes, and they ignore all the other things that were done in context. And I think Adrian made a really good point, whereas when you look at what future U.S. policy under Trump administration would be, okay, it's not just Ukrainian context. What is he doing towards Russia in general? What is he doing towards China in general? What is he doing towards Iran in general? Because all those things, much like the larger context of the Cold War, are going to impact what happens on these little narrow fronts. The reason why Berlin never became a flashpoint of war was not the Berlin Brigade, right? Those guys are the Alamos. They were going to die, right? It was because there was a whole bunch of other things that in the end of the day convinced Stalin that taking Berlin wasn't a smart move.
Let me just add one thing that nobody's really discussed. So I don't think it's going to be a military response to establish a peace here. But like a lot of the other things, this Biden-Harris administration.
They may give them the
touch-
things they want to do to achieve the
One
military.
second, but this administration has done sort of half-hearted or not well is all of the sanctions against Russia. Russia is in essence evading virtually every sanction of record. There are stated exceptions, there are unstated exceptions. There are countries like South Africa where everybody knows is helping the Russians and the Americans are not doing anything to tell South Africa, stop helping them, otherwise you're going to have a problem. Biden's not doing anything. Venezuela, Cuba, there's a whole host of countries, aside from Iran and China, working with the Russians to help them evade sanctions. That's going to stop on day 2 or 3 of a Trump administration. Russia is going to suffer economically. It's going to be destroyed under Trump administrations. If you're going to have sanctions, you're going to have real sanctions that are effective. You're not going to let some banks trade oil for the Russians, some banks be sanctioned and not be able to function. It's a joke. So I think if those sanctions would have been put in to be fully effective 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I don't think we would have been here. But everything that Biden-Harris did was without a plan, without a focus, without a strategy, and not done in an effective manner. That's going to end, and I think that's going to address the issue and eliminate the need for a true military confrontation, because Putin's going to realize he's going to go out of business. In essence, they will seize money. For example, Trump seized the reason Iran behaved during the first Trump administration is their economy was basically out of business. Trump froze all of Iran's foreign assets, about $150 billion. Biden released it the first month they were in office. There were sanctions on oil and gas in Iran. They couldn't export, they couldn't do anything. There were other sanctions on Iran. Their economy was out of business. Trump's going to do the same thing to the Russians if this thing does not get resolved appropriately.
Actually, may I have a question on Glenn about sanctions? Because it was Trump's sanctions on Nord Stream, but immediately after Biden took office, he canceled them. So what was the ratio? What was the reason why Biden changed that policy?
Because his policies were very German-centric. You know, coming in with the new German government, he thought that sanctions were an irritating factor to U.S.-German relations. And so he waived the sanctions and it went completely against what Trump did. So that's the major impetus for what he.
And it was really for a lot of European countries, so we're against Nord Stream. But
Yes,
no
well, he's
one
telling them
listened
to be,
that, so-
at the same time, he's saying we need to sanction Russia because of
So
what they did in
he wanted
Ukraine. And then they're turning around and saying, okay,
to help Germans, but
yeah, exactly.
And then
so-
all the Czechs want to vote for
Infuriated.
Harris. Whatever.
So short comment and then Hacek. You are absolutely right, Adrian, on sanctions. So I don't know much about tanks, but financial systems I see at my work every day. So without sanctioning SVB, Sberbank, there are no Russian sanctions.
Right.
At the same time, 7 major European banks are still doing happy business with Russians. And final point, sanctions, economic sanctions is about, finance. Finance is two-way highway. You need to have 2 persons to do transactions. So while going after some oligarch in Novosibirsk and not sanctioning a guy who is sending him money, it never worked. And currently, and you can look on data of International Institute of Finance, there is an economist called Robin Brooks, quite famous guy, who is doing, for example, trade between even Central Europe and teeny tiny country called Kyrgyzstan.
Right.
And for example, Czech Republic or Poland or German trade with Kyrgyzstan is up 100%.
The Kurds just
100%.
They just want to buy Skoda cars.
February 2022.
It's a miracle of advertising.
Anyway, questions. Jan Macháček.
The other fallout of that, you would be hard pressed in Africa, for example, to find many transactions denominated in dollars. They're in yuan, they're in God knows what other currency, because of avoiding sanctions, the influence of the Russians there and the influence of the Chinese.
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, I think this whole issue of getting, this is going to destroy the dollar as the dominant thing, I think is way overblown. But I do think this is a common Republican Democrat problem, right? Which is sanctions are not a strategy. Sanctions are a tool which are, if they're integrated into an overall strategy, can actually be effective. And there's a difference between sanctioning somebody and enforcing the sanctions you put on somebody. And so I really look for hopefully an administration that have kind of learned the lessons of the last 10 years about just throwing sanctions out there and recognizing that they're not kind of the easy button thing that people think they are.
They think they will solve everything.
Yeah,
That's what Biden felt.
So actually, this gets to something Europeans should be very concerned about. Right? The issue that we never talk about is we have a massively growing Chinese nuclear capability. We've got a Russian nuclear capability with each one of the United States. We are heading into an era of nuclear competition, which kind of looks like the bad old days. Arms control agreements are not going to solve anybody's problem anytime soon. We're going to have more proliferation. So the resilience and importance of the American strategic deterrent is more relevant for Europe than it's ever been, and that's really important. So this administration has a policy called integrated deterrence, which is, we just don't deter with nuclear weapons. We have lots of weapons. We integrate our weapons so we can deter them with sanctions. We can deter them with diplomacy. We can send Adrian Zuckerman to threaten them, right? This is a really bad idea, and it's super nonsensical because the only thing that really deters nuclear weapons is nuclear weapons. And so if one of the things I truly hope dies, and Europeans should pray with me, is this idea of integrated deterrence, because it's literally nonsense. We have to seriously get back into not just the nuclear umbrella, which interestingly enough is one of the few bipartisan things in the United States. 10 years ago, Obama had this idea of a road to zero. We were just going to get rid of all nuclear weapons, and the Russians would say, oh, geez, we don't need ours anymore because the Americans got rid of theirs. I mean, that was a nutty idea that he gave up on. But today, actually, Democrats will fund modernization. Democrats will fund the triad. And equally important, because the most secure, stable environment, strategic environment, is an offense-defense mix. Not just the capacity to vaporize your enemy, but the capacity to defend your own step. And so the role of air and missile defenses really is growing. And so if there's one area where we are going to have to really work together is Europe needs to be much more resilient in air and missile defense to defend infrastructure and populations. And if you pair that with a hopefully continuing resilient American strategic deterrent, that could be a very, very stable strategic environment.
Jan Macháček, generál řetka Mirror Námočník.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask about unpredictability. Trump often says about himself that he wants to be unpredictable in foreign policy. So I would love to know what it means. Like if you spoke about current administration and its failures in foreign and security policy, it's pretty clear. In the Middle East, when Trump says unpredictable, well, it's actually quite predictable in Middle East what he would do, like deepen and enlarge these Abraham Accords, isolate Iran again, and be more clear supporter of Israel. That's clear. But as far as Ukraine and Russia, it's a little bit more complicated, at least for us here. So because if he says I'm unpredictable, you have to realize, as Jan was saying here, that people are a little bit afraid that people, especially in Eastern Europe, are a little bit afraid that he might trade us off for something. Because if he says I'm unpredictable, it could be like strategic ambiguity with Taiwan, which is quite a smart policy, which from some reason Biden canceled because he said 3 times we will intervene militarily. But it could also mean something bad from our point of view because we really don't know. So it's smart from the point of Trump. I'm unpredictable because my adversaries will be afraid of me, but they are also a little bit afraid.
Can I jump in? Sure. So I think that's the joke, right? Because I actually think Trump's enormously predictable. He's going to do what's in U.S. interests. And I'll give you my one kind of doubting moment that I thought, well, that's a Yahoo move. And that was Trump's decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And I thought, well, what the hell are you doing that for? I mean, what is that going to change? First of all, everybody's been promising that forever. Nobody ever did it. What's the big deal? Why are you doing that? And I thought, well, that's just stupid. That's some idea that Ambassador Friedman put in his head or something. It turns out it was actually quite strategic. Trump wanted to challenge the notion that everything in the Middle East had to be tied to the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, and that without a two-state, nothing in the Middle East could get done. And so Trump wanted to consciously challenge that assumption by saying, I'm going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and we're going to see if the world explodes. And if it doesn't, I think that demonstrates that the Arab nations aren't as sworn and committed to the Palestinian cause as they say they are, and that we can pursue on this idea of the Abraham Accords. And so he did that. And of course, the world didn't explode. And he was right. He proceeded with the Abraham Accords. So I always laugh when I hear about Trump's super unpredictable because I find him really super easy to read. Doesn't mean he's always going to do what I say, but if you look at it through the lens of, because he should, right? If you look at it through the lens of American interests, by and large, it's actually fairly, I think fairly clear. Am I wrong? Please tell me if I'm wrong. You know the guy. I don't know. Trump once did tweet something nice about me, but that's about the extent of our relationship.
See? I think you're 100% right. And I think knowing the man, he's got a tremendous sense, which I mentioned earlier, of doing what's right, of common sense, decency, and trying to do what's right for America first, but also for its allies. I mean, what's the national security interest of the U.S.? What's the national security interest of its ally? Because if it's, and people forget this, because when I just said that, if I were to be quoted by somebody on the Democratic side, you see, Trump's going to abandon its allies and do what's in the national security of the U.S. But what he means by that is that he cannot let one of our strategic allies fail because that hurts our national interest. So from a scale of 0 to 100, where is that ally in the balance? Well, it depends on the issue at hand. It may be in different spots depending on the issue. But he's not, it hurts American national interest if Moldova and Romania, for example, since the ambassadors here are jeopardized by the Russians. It affects the Black Sea. It has very substantial consequences. The U.S. is not going to let that happen. And where the sort of non-predictability comes in is, what is the U.S. response? Is it going to be military? Is it going to be sanctions that really work? Is it going to be a mix? Is it going to be something else? I don't know. He's not going to tell the Russians. He's not going to tell the Chinese. He was having dinner with Xi Jinping during the first administration when the rockets were flying. He told them over dessert, everybody thought Xi Jinping was going to choke and die right at the spot. So the point is, the man is effective, he's pragmatic, and he's not, in my opinion, going to play around and do things for the sake of saying he did something so that he's not being taken seriously.
I mean, it doesn't matter that he might. And we're not saying he's not going to maybe say something outrageous or games things or threaten people or play mind games with things. He does do that, but so my favorite anecdote, which has the virtue of being true, was when he sat down with Merkel and he said, "We're pulling out of INF," and she got very emotionally upset. She goes, "Oh my God, Europeans won't understand this. We grew up. This was an anchor of stability. I understand why you have to do this. The Russians are cheating and everything. Okay, this makes perfect sense. But we just, if we do this presumptively, the people just won't understand." And she goes, "I need time to talk to our friends in Europe and kind of get everybody on the same page. So when you pull the trigger on this, it won't kind of elicit kind of this, oh my God, the world's coming to an end." And Trump looked at her and said, "How long do you need?" And she was like, "Oh my God." She said, 6 months. He goes, "Okay." Right. I think that's the kind of decision maker he actually is.
So when I came to Czechia, I had kind of an idea for what I wanted to talk about in conversations related to a book project I'm writing about the impact of the Ukraine war and how it's reinventing NATO's eastern flank. Now, what Jim said about President Trump is bold strategic moves. One of these moves that I've asked among some of the former Supreme Allied Commanders of Europe that are in my circles that I have in contact with is that what could be done on the eastern flank that would affect Czechia? What would be the vision to bring Czechia make it more relevant and important to NATO, right? And when I've asked around, one of the ideas I asked was, why not move SHAPE headquarters out of Belgium, a country that only does 1.2% to its defense budget, okay? And why not move SHAPE headquarters to somewhere further in the east?
Like a really nice city with a high quality of life and
like
a really cool countryside.
Like Ostrava. And when I asked around, some people said Ostrava And
They really said it.
one SACURE said, I like that idea, let's keep discussing it. Now there's pros and there's cons. But given this is a project that some very wealthy Czech businessman who should fund would be what be the strategic rationale, and it would be the impact of doing this. Now, maybe it couldn't be done in overnight, but the political sense about SHAPE headquarters was that it was moved from Paris out of the political dispute with de Gaulle and Kennedy. So the point is that if you want a new Eastern Europe and you want some to say Trump legacy, would be something bold and strategic that says, turns to the rest of Western Europe and says, look, you're not footing your bill, and that we need to do something new in the East. Now that would be bold and new strategic, and all I'm trying to do is develop the pros and cons for doing it. Now I know the F-35s that Czechia is going to buy are going to be based there. I actually talked to a former Slovak defense minister, and he loved the idea because he says that will make us get further involved in NATO. It makes us kind of integrated with the East and the Carpathians, this whole idea of a kind of a new orientation in the East. So this is what I came here to listen to people, to talk, to ask this question. Because I don't think even as small nations, you need to stop dreaming about doing something bold and important. So what Jim said about Trump and Jerusalem, I mean, sometimes he takes a leader to do something bold and strategic that's new and different. And certainly Trump has those instincts. But this is when he makes a decision, he doesn't just, he delegates it. So he lets people kind of beneath him try to figure it out and how it's done. But that's something I wanted to throw out there that I've been thinking about and wanted to ask, and it's suddenly becoming, and I have talked to people in Britain who were advisors at NATO, and they didn't entirely like the idea of moving out of Belgium because that's where the NATO nuclear command and control bunker's been built. They invested billions of dollars in building that bunker there, so they're not going to move out of there overnight. But the point is that you move elements from SHAPE headquarters in Belgium further to the east. So,
But he also started doing that in Romania, where he wanted to move down a brigade headquarters out of Germany and move other assets south into Romania, which Biden killed. So there were other things, this was actually public, but there were other things being discussed along the lines you mentioned, which I don't want to get into.
I know you'd love to have Romania. I mean, but the point is you can't get the rest of the alliance. You got to do it in stages to get it further.
How about some missile defense sites? Oh, never mind.
So before giving floor to Carlos, I like what you said, Adrian, on China, and I will share with you guys anecdote. I was literally there when Trump went to see President Xi 7 years ago. So Chinese foreign affairs ministry planners, they were studying Trump for long. On a camera, please, on a camera. They studied Trump for a long time, and basically their reading was, this guy is egomaniacal, big ego, everything is about showmanship. Let's give him something that nobody has been ever given to. Let's throw him party at a forbidden city, which from Confucian, and Chinese perspective is a sacrilege. Okay, let's do a party. It was a big splash party, red carpet, and literally inside the palace where emperor lived. Trump ate his Kung Pao chicken, ate his Great Wall of China wine. It's really called, it's a famous brand now, Great Wall of China. And then he said, okay, President Xi, now I will tell you what I want. How? You just been given a party. This is what you want now. No. I like your Kung Pao, but let's now do business. And after Trump departed and the trade war started, Chinese were super perplexed. And I think they are perplexed still now. Because I'm in touch with some of them and they don't understand. And actually they are worried more about Trump. Now, again, I'm telling you the data, Chinese are not looking forward to having Trump too. General Zeka.
Hi, thanks for this discussion. I like the SHAPE idea.
Could you? But that would relate to
that we really need a bold leader, because if you realistically look at the underrepresentation of the Eastern and Central European in NATO,
Yes.
and the last election of Secretary General,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no sentiment for that, but I like it.
And Trump
You know how
hates
much I
Rutte.
like-
By the way, we would find a bunker here. Don't worry. So anyway, you during the discussion you mentioned that these geopolitical trends, the Sahel,
Right.
the BRICS, the China, Russia, Iran, and so on. I agree. And you mentioned that a lot of that is caused by the war, but I don't agree on that completely.
Right.
I know the war is making it worse, definitely, but I think it started before, and I think this full-scale invasion is part of the trend, which has been going on for some time, and I think it's caused by a lack of strategy and a sensible policy towards Russia. So my question is whether you, with the Trump, whether you think there will be ambition to go that deep, not just stopping the war, which needs to be stopped at some time, I understand, but then actually not just stopping the war so we can focus on other problems, but actually going forward with this Russian strategy. Because, if it's just stopping the war, it's really bad news for countries like us. It's like if you say, okay, we need to stop the war with Hitler in 1939
Right.
because business is bad, Jewish immigration, blah, blah, blah. So really, yeah, that needs to be stopped. We have no strategy. I agree with all that, but do you think there will be that ambition to go that step
Well,
further?
I think, there's probably a couple of things on the table. And again, we don't speak for the administration and, we're just kind of reading tea leaves of the people that work and talk around them. The logical strategy for the alliance between Iran, China, and Russia is to make them less valuable partners for each other. That's the way you're going to stress the relationship, not by trying to pull one out, right? So that's the first recognition. I feel more comfortable that might come to a realization in a Republican administration than a Democratic administration. On Russia, I think it's not just about stopping the war. I think there's a couple other component pieces you have to look at. One is, I think our expectation is President Trump will come back and double down on the 3 Cs initiatives, recognizing that the North-South economic integration is a potential European engine of economic prosperity. It's also going to bring population back to the east and strengthen that flank. It's also going to build infrastructure, which is going to strengthen the flank. So I think that's one. The other big one is energy. This is 180 degrees, right? This is, instead of saying we're going to start with green transition and net zero as a goal and everything else is collateral damage, we're going to start with putting the most reliable, affordable, dependent energy into the global marketplace, right? And using that to fuel growth for our friends and our allies. And at the same time, they're not going to be happy about Venezuelan exports. They're not going to be happy about Iranian exports, and probably not super excited about Russian exports. The difference is, other countries like India, for example, when the last time the United States went back and we sanctioned Iranian imports, we figured out ways to make Indian energy whole, so they didn't suffer as a result of that. I think is going to, those things I think are going to help put a lot of pressure on the Russians. And the other one, of course, is, he's got to deal with the Iran problem. And it's not going to be the maximum pressure of 2016, but it's going to be the maximum pressure of 2025, whatever that looks like. He's got to deal with the surrogates in Latin America, which I think that the administration is coming to realize that you just can't let the Russians and the Chinese and Iranians run wild in Latin America, and he has to deal with the countries that are enabling that. So I think that's true. Africa, I think Africa is this is the bold one, is actually going to be on the U.S. agenda. You can't add 500 million people to Africa, and it's not going to have consequences for all of us. So we can either sit and wait for those consequences to fall out, or we can try to deal with it. And the reality is the United States is never going to put a major effort into Africa. I mean, even if we wanted to, we don't have the capacity to do that. I think we realize that everything we've done to this point is pretty stupid, and we need a much more pragmatic strategy. And that we're going to have to we need to work with European partners, Middle East partners, and Asian partners, Japan, Korea, India, pragmatically in the region together. And if we're actually all kind of pulling in the same direction, we have enough power and influence to help our friends and move that in the right direction and deal with some of the Russian and Chinese issues there. I think that is the kind of elements of an American strategy. I think if you read O'Brien's article he did, Foreign Affairs?
Yes.
There's a lot of elements of that in there. I think if you read some of the other things we've seen. And I think the big issue is to get beyond this notion that we're just going to pivot to Asia and abandon Europe, which you hear from some folks even some folks who support Trump, because there's no realism behind that. And if there's anything that Trump is, he's not just we all think we're realistic, right? You know, even he thinks he's realistic, right? But Trump is a realist, right? He believes in power, right? And to exercise power, you have to have power. So that means you have to have growth, you have to have security, and you have to have friends, right? And I see all of that in the future Trump administration.
So, Mirek Zámečí question. We are slowly coming to the end, 15 minutes left maybe, so let's try to speed up. So basically people can ask more questions. Mirek, please.
Yeah, well, I listened carefully how you described the most probable scenario for Ukraine conflict. Well, if I sum it up, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically, and I agree with that, there is no chance that they would be admitted into EU soon because of their agriculture. Poles would be against, French would be against, God knows who else. So this is not, realistic assumption that they would be accepted soon. Well, the same holds true for NATO. Yeah. Well, then if I were Zelensky, I would say, well, first we need to get a nuke like now. What would you tell?
Yeah, no, I don't agree. I think the lesson of the Ukraine war is if you can't win a conventional war, you don't start a nuclear one, right? And nuclear war is only good at one thing, which is deterring other nuclear war. Russia's one of the world's largest nuclear powers, and they've been invaded by Ukraine, which doesn't have a nuclear weapon. So I think the answer is conventional deterrence in Ukraine and building, and I think the Israeli model is that they're going to build a domestic Ukrainian defense industry, which is going to, and I think we're going to help them do that. And I wasn't at Mar-a-Lago, right?
The Israelis do that.
Yeah, well, that's true. But they don't use it either. And it never stopped people from attacking them, which is a really important note. So I wasn't at Mar-a-Lago, but there were two takeaways which were pretty clear. One is Trump was not super happy when Zelensky went to the ammunition plant in Pennsylvania and got really framed into doing like something like a blatantly political thing. And Trump said, that was stupid. If you want to build trust and confidence between us, you have to start now. Yeah. The other thing was Trump said, and it was publicly said, don't worry, my friend, we're going to help rebuild Ukraine. He would not have said that if he didn't mean it. And the other thing I'll say, which nobody ever talks about, is if Trump wanted to throw Ukraine under the bus, he had an opportunity to do that months ago with the budget deal. All he had to do was say is any Republican who votes for this deal doesn't have the support of Donald Trump, and that bill would have failed. He didn't do that. And he did it specifically for the reason he actually wants Ukraine to be in as strongest position as possible if he comes into office in January 2025. Because as you know, if you're going to negotiate with the Russians, you want to negotiate from a position of strength. So the last thing he wants is for Ukraine to be weak when he walks in the office, if he does walk in the office.
Martin Danko and then Macedonian ambassador.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you think that we are already in multipolar world? And will the new Trump administration perceive the world as multipolar? And are we back in the great power games again? That Russia, China...
I think this polar stuff is political science stupidity. We have to stop talking about these polar things. It's utter nonsense, right? We're in a world in which countries are trying to look after themselves. And I think by falling into this trap of, we're in a multipolar world, bipolar, it's I've lived through all of them. You know what? And to me, they all kind of look the same. So I don't think it's really constructive.
You behave differently. USA, when the Soviet Union was let's say, the great power, you should have respected, like, what are their interests and what they want to perceive.
I don't think actually we did. I mean, I think American foreign policy was largely based on American interest. And I think this polar thing is nonsense. When we were the great bipolar, power, did everybody in Europe do what we say? Heck no. Half the time you guys were arguing. Well, you weren't because you're on the wrong side. But half the time these guys were arguing and fighting with us. I mean, so this notion that somehow, America was omnipresent and all powerful, post World War II was, may be true for used during Reconstruction, but then there were all kinds of limitations to that. So I just think this polarity thing is different. So here's what I will say, because I know we're out of time, but here's the problem, which is it's not that, we're going to have a competition with China, Russia, and Iran. We've been through 4 presidents now, Democrat and Republican. They all wind up doing that, even when they say they don't want to, right? So, and in large part, it's because China, Russia, and Iran want to have a competition with us. This is a fact of life. This is unlikely to change unless there's major regime change, either, on one side or the other. Here's where America has failed. We've never had a really good strategy for the rest of the world. It was easy during the Cold War, right? Because you were either on the blue side or the red side. And if you're the blue side, you did a lot of stupid stuff, but we figured that out, right? If you're on the red side, we didn't know who you are, we couldn't count, you were all just bad guys, right? what do we do now? And we've been struggling for this for decades. And I think the answer is never going to be that we're going to have a competition with Iran, China, and Russia, and we're going to say you're with us or against us, and we're going to have a big blue sphere where all the good guys are and a big red sphere, right? And I think the right strategy for the United States is to encourage what we've been talking about, this idea of free and open spaces. There are lots of people around the world that share this idea that connecting in the commons, letting countries run their economy, this is a good idea. Trump loves the 3 Seas initiative. Adrian's talked about a free and open Black Sea. Our Romanian friends often talk these days about a free and open Black Sea. We talk about interconnectivity of expanding that through the Middle East, adding additional corridors in addition to the Suez Canal. We talk about the Southern Corridor. We talk about a middle corridor connecting Central Asia and the Caucasus to Western Europe. I think what U.S. strategy should be is to encourage and partner in countries that want to be free and open spaces. How does that impact great power competition? Well, the more free and open spaces there are, the more it robs spaces for the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians to meddle in the affairs of others.
Ambassador?
Thank you. Obviously, the key issue and the key dispute is the Ukraine. Recently, the Czech Republic marked 20 years of membership of NATO and 20 years of membership of the EU and 25 years of membership of NATO. And President Petr Pavel emphasized that we will help to Ukraine and we will support to solve the problem with peacefully, but we can't forget the Western Balkan countries.
Oh, good point.
So in that direction, we speak about the Trump policy towards Eastern Europe. We belong to Eastern Europe, but we have the Western Balkan countries name. And I am curious about what kind of policy the Trump has towards Western Balkan countries, having in mind that Russia interfered in the countries like Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, and Bulgaria, which are the countries who are members of NATO.
I think Adrian is closest to the topic as expert on this.
You know, I think the game's going to change. I truly think the game's going to change. I think the last 3.5, 4 years, from my perspective, it's been the worst American administration of my lifetime. They're equivocal, they're weak, they have no plans other than shooting from the hip, depending on what happens tomorrow, some sort of reaction, which opens the door for Chinese influence, Russian influence, all kinds of other influence. I couldn't agree with you more with regard to Russian influence there. I ask you where the placards with pictures of Putin appeared in Africa and some of these civil wars. Those people holding him don't even know who Putin is, in my opinion. It was all organized. So the point is, all these things have to be brought under control. You've had an administration now that's basically clueless, in my opinion. We've had a Secretary of State who, when he was nominated to be Assistant Secretary of State for Obama, John McCain gave a speech on the floor of the Senate saying that the man was dangerous for America and dangerous for American troops at home and abroad for half an hour and objecting to his nomination. The man's now Secretary of State. He doesn't have a plan. There's no administration plan to deal with that issue, to deal with Ukraine. So how you can sustain a war and sustain a country without having a plan, to me, is just beyond comprehension. But there isn't one. So what will Trump do? What a Trump administration will do? I think all Russian adventurism will be put to a halt. I think American investment and American economic power, energy power, and other initiatives will be allowed to come back into various countries. America will not be driven out of Niger and surrender military bases that took God knows how much money and years of time to build. So I think the idea of America being weak and equivocal is going to end. I can't tell you specifically what Trump administration is going to do in Serbia or in Montenegro, or in Slovenia for that matter, or anywhere else. But it's going to change. There's going to be a plan. There's going to be a pushback on Russian expansionism. And my sense is there will be real world sanctions to cut off the ability of the Russians to sustain these initiatives. The Iranian economy will be materially diminished inside of 6 months to a year, less than a year, in my opinion. Same thing with the Russians, same thing with the Chinese, and the Chinese are the greatest danger in all of this.
I think the short way to say that is the United States will not tolerate anybody pushing a button in the Balkans and blowing the place up, because it is the back door of NATO's frontier, and we can't afford to have massive instability in the back door of the NATO frontier. In the long term of how do we solve all the issues in the Balkans, I think we realized there was no silver bullet, right? And that's one thing is we've got to start partnering together on these issues in a serious way, where we're starting to pull in the same direction. And the Balkans is probably the number one place to do that.
Who wants to have a last question? Okay, if no one, I am quite amazed that throughout the whole evening, nobody asked a question on Hezbollah, because this very weekend we are celebrating life and especially death of Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah. You now a little bit touch it, and I think that this topic needs to have, we need to address it a little bit deeper, because on one side, we know how Trump behaved. Now, the main advisor to Vice President Harris is Philip Gordon, big architect of JCPOA, called also Iran deal. And so we know how this is going to...
Reset with Russia.
Sorry?
Architect of reset with Russia.
Yeah. So maybe I ask Glenn my last question, and you can guys comment. Trump versus Kamala, Middle East, it's on fire. Bibi Netanyahu is doing business on behalf of America, let's call it like this, Hamas and now Hezbollah. Prince Mohammed bin Salman very openly yesterday say, no sermon on behalf of Nasrallah in my country, which is super, super important, that the ruler of Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, said nothing for Nasrallah in mosques of Saudi Arabia. So what do you think, how it's going to be?
I don't, I think that a lot depends on the political stability of Netanyahu. And so this certainly benefits him politically, but whether it enables people in the settlements in northern Israel to go back, which is his political objective, remains uncertain. And today there are reports that Israeli troops may be going to resume ground operations back inside southern Lebanon. That didn't end very well in Israel in 2006. So we'll see. But I certainly, it doesn't seem to be ending.
I would like to end on a nice word for the Biden administration.
Don't go.
No, it's true. I think Trump's answer was, well, if I was there and I'd had Israel back, we wouldn't be here where we are. Okay. Clearly the difference, in a Trump administration was they would be all in for supporting Israel. But the fact that the U.S. has made one of the largest military deployments in the Middle East in modern times, I think is keeping Iran on the sidelines. And so what Joe Biden has proven is Winston Churchill was exactly right. America will always do the right thing when it has exhausted all other possibilities.
Let me add to that. Yes, maybe Biden did the right thing in an instant, but he did the wrong thing overall. He can't help himself. Even Obama recognized that Biden can't help himself to mess things up. The problem here is not Hamas, it's not Hezbollah, it's not the Houthis, it's not whatever other terrorist groups running around. The problem here is Iran. Iran controls these groups, Iran funds these groups. The orders to do or not to do something for these groups comes out of Iran. During the first Trump administration, Iran was an economic failure. At the end of the Trump administration, there were riots inside Iran. From my perspective, it was close to overthrowing the mullahs and getting in some non-religious government. Was that going to happen if Trump stayed another 4 years or not? I don't know. I think it probably would have happened, but who knows in hindsight, what would have, could have. So I think the issue, what we're seeing here with Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and all these guys are symptoms of a disease. And the disease is Iran. Until we deal with Iran seriously, until we stop their nuclear proliferation attempts, and they're much closer now under this crazy thing that Obama tried to advocate, and then Biden made so many concessions and trying to make nice to them in the hope of achieving something. The problem here is Iran. You can't be nice to them. They're killers. They're terrorists. They support world disorder and chaos. They have to be dealt with. As soon as you deal with Iran, the terrorist problem will disappear, in my opinion.
Do you think that's
You
how
can
Trump
come
sees it? Do you think that's how Trump
Pretty
sees it?
much.
Anyway, evening is over. No, debate is over. Evening is not over. We are not throwing you out. Let's have a chat. Let's have a drink. I would like to thank you guys the best. I think that lot been debated tonight. Hopefully, let's stay in touch. Let's see how the elections will happen in 43 days. Just a teaser and invitation for you. On Wednesday, 23rd of October, we will have here Chief Advisor of Nikki Haley. We will have Donald Trump advisor on Balkan countries. We will have also Mike Doran, who is probably the top US expert on Iran and the Middle East. Everybody invited, the same setup, starting 7:30. And now, evening, and debate is over. Have you
Hey,
cup?
I like cigar.
Adrian, let's take a picture.